right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they're living in a modern day spiritual paradise. Never is that more true than this episode. I'm your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, most importantly, a little guy raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the 1970s and 1980s. As I do, quick warning, everybody's in a different spot on their journey with this thing called the truth. We try to have some fun here, healing, sarcasm, humor, tears. It all comes into play. Please note that it is never, ever, ever meant to offend anyone. Simply my take and experiences on my time as a Jehovah's Witness. And I got to say, this week, I want to begin with something that I really think is very important. I want to recognize what was a very, very critical decision in Norway this past week or so. If you've been following that whole story or haven't been following it, I highly recommend you Google that and take a look at some of the details. That being God's organization, Jehovah's Witnesses, have lost their registration as a religious organization in Norway. The Oslo District Court ruled against God's organization and upheld the decisions of the government who denied Jehovah's Witnesses the state subsidies, that means cash, they had peacefully been getting from the government for 30 years. Zillions of dollars, millions. They have, in fact, at this point, stripped Jehovah's guys of the right to even seal marriages or do marriages. But more importantly, I might add, to Jesus and his fine nine is that they lose all the money. An estimated $50 million to this point, if I understand it correctly. Please feel free to correct me if not. And I gotta say, just my brief exposure to it, it was amazing to watch the courageous people, the Norwegian folks and others, former Jehovah's Witnesses that testified at that trial originally, going into some of the ugliest parts of Jehovah's Witnesses, including their treatment of children, shunning, the blood doctrine, and so much more. No word yet from Jehovah or Jesus or even the governing body, as Satan has apparently thrown a punch that landed. We're about to start hearing about persecution. Trust me, they're drafting the articles now, and how Armageddon is imminent, and how this court case decision only proves that Satan is after God's people. But listen, from my perspective, times are changing, people. They're changing. And it may be slow. It may not be as quickly as some of us want as we expose the treatment of Jehovah's Witnesses within the organization. But I do want to say it's changing, and kudos, big kudos to the brave people who went to court against Jesus' legal team in Norway. Absolutely wild. Couldn't be happier to see that. Stay tuned. Congratulations and big respect to those that got involved with that. I'm going to dive into a murky pool of emotions this week. I'm going to make a bold statement. There is a daily battle for our minds. I don't think that shocks anybody. It seems to be thematic on this show. Can't get away from it. It's a major reason that mental health professionals encourage things like meditation today, because it's not just Jehovah's Witnesses, it is everything. But they encourage time to just sit, clear space, clear your mind, your thoughts. I got to tell you, I've tried this. I'm continuing to try it, but I haven't mastered the art of meditation. But I am a big believer in it. It's undeniable, the health and mental health benefits that come with it. But for me, sometimes it's just about taking a walk and clearing my head, which is incredibly effective as well. But nowhere is the endless assault on our thoughts and motives more evident than with this little thing called social media. It's my opinion that history will show that social media was truly, in hindsight, an evil influence on our society that at the time we couldn't even begin to measure. If you've caught some of the documentaries and some of those that have built some of these famous social media sites, many of them live with regret because of what it does to people's heads. But if you couple your social media sites with your cell phone and you have a toxic cocktail for the brain, and you arguably have the most powerful mind control known in the universe at this point. That's my opinion, nothing more. But when you dive into it, you tend to see that it is incredibly dangerous to us. From the Harvard Graduate School of Arts and Sciences from May of 2018, Trevor Haynes shares some chilling facts about something you and I take for granted all day long. We are being manipulated by our cell phones and the social media sites. And the odd and ironic thing about it is we even pay to do it every single month when we pay our cell phone bill. Oh, the irony. And if you think that comment and that belief is too bold, let me ask you, how do you feel if you misplace your phone? What goes through your body? Did you panic? Did your heart start beating fast? Were you obsessed with finding it? I want to tell the younger generation that might be listening, there was a time this was not a thing. We didn't worry about phones. They were attached to walls. We couldn't care less. But today, this guy included, they are attached to our hip, in a pocket, or in our hand all day, every day, and we are borderline obsessed with them. According to one study, about 73% of people claim to experience this unique flavor of anxiety, which makes sense when you consider that adults in the U.S. spend an average of 2 to 4 hours a day tapping, typing, and swiping on their cell phones and devices, which adds up to over 2,600 daily touches. Our cell phones control us in so many ways, and it is highly uncomfortable to admit that. There's one study from 2015 that shows the depth of our attachment to our phones. And it's this little thing called phantom phone sensations, or PPS. Everything has an acronym now. And if you're wondering what that is, it's the sensation of your cell phone vibrating in your pocket, but the cell phone isn't in your pocket. I mean, wow. We are under their spell. PPS, there's a condition for this now. Oh my God, something dinged, my phone's vibrating. My phone isn't even on me. And then it starts the other panic. Where's my phone? It's incredible to think about how controlled we are by modern technology, particularly our cell phones and the social media sites, which are our most popular destination on them. But the article continues. It says, though humans have evolved to be social, a key feature to our success as a species, the social structures in which we thrive, tend to contain about 150 individuals. This number is orders of magnitude smaller than the 2 billion potential connections we carry around in our pockets every day. There is no doubt that smartphones provide immense benefit to society, but their cost is becoming more and more apparent. Studies are beginning to show links between smartphone usage and increased levels of anxiety and depression, poor sleep quality, and increased risk of car injury or death. End quote. People, don't text when driving, please. Our minds are in a constant loop with these things as everyone and anyone tries to get a piece of our thoughts and emotions. It's one of those things that, what do we say? We're all guilty of it, this guy included. And let me just say at this point, the irony is not lost on me. I am currently speaking into a microphone, sharing my thoughts and information with the goal of getting people to access social media sites or podcasts and think. I often wonder how we can escape the endless loops that we all live in. I wonder even more where the line is between being informed, sharing information, sharing personal feelings and experiences, and the word I want to focus on this week, which is manipulation. It's an uncomfortable word. It's an uncomfortable dynamic. I'm going to spare you the obvious when discussing the fake perceptions and marketing that goes into social media. We all know about fake filters, the perception that someone is living an amazing life of endless fun and you're not. And I'll even throw myself under the bus. We still use it, this guy included. We've graduated a long way in my generation from billboards on the side of the road, which are still there, not as effective, designed to manipulate us into spending money. For those of us that remember, that was about all our exposed minds got back in the day. Despite the depth of influence, often bad influence, we expose ourselves to on a daily basis with our phones and social media and more, it arguably pales in comparison to what most of us listening to this show have been exposed to from 9 guys in upstate New York and the guys that came before them, otherwise known as the leadership and currently governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. And the worst part is, and this is what I want to underline this week, they know what they are doing. From the Watchtower of 1999, April 1st, pages 20 through 22, under the aptly titled article, Who Molds Your Thinking? The Faithful and Discreet Slave give us this, quote, the fact is that how you think, and hence how you act, is always influenced in some way by the feelings and views of those to whom you listen. But if they are people who only have their own interests at heart and who are themselves misled or corrupted in their thinking, deceivers of the mind, as the Apostle Paul described them, then beware. Thus, do not become complacent and think that no one could ever influence you. Most likely it is already happening more frequently than you might care to admit without your even noticing. End quote. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Wow. The lack of self-awareness, or should I say deceit, is apparent in that paragraph. 9 men who spend every waking hour looking to influence the lives of millions, warning us about people looking to influence and impact our lives. But if that admission doesn't get your attention, imagine this. Imagine using a quote from this guy to land their point home when it comes to manipulating someone's mind. The Awake of June 22nd, 2000, page 4, features the following bold quote in print. It says, quote, by clever and persevering use of propaganda, even heaven can be represented as hell to the people, and conversely, the most wretched life as paradise. End quote. Are you wondering who said that? That was none other than the illustrious, and I still can't believe it's in print, Adolf Hitler in his famous book, Mein Kampf. They featured it in the Awake of 2000. But if you're taking notes, did Adolf Hitler, featured in God's organization's literature, just say that something that looks like a paradise could actually be a wretched hell, a wretched life? That you can manipulate people into believing hell looks like paradise? Why, yes, he did. There is so much irony to this quote, and that it's featured in their literature. Where do I even begin? Factual or not, seeing the name Hitler inside a magazine whose mission statement is, quote, this magazine builds confidence in the creator's promise of a peaceful and secure new world that is about to replace the present wicked, lawless system of things, end quote. Seeing it is highly uncomfortable. You just don't expect to see quotes from guys like Hitler. Just an odd feeling as I read it. Still an odd feeling. But look, I digress. Judge Joe did try to build a friendship with him at one time. For those who aren't aware of that in Jehovah's Witnesses, they both openly admitted they didn't like Jewish people. That's right. Judge Joe Rutherford didn't like Jewish people, leading this host to wonder what his boss, King Jesus, thought about when his only human experience was as a Jewish guy. Was there a convo when Judge Joe got to heaven? Who knows? Then again, Jesus sat out the Holocaust and he just observed it anyway. He just watched on anyway as people were killed. I digress. Subject for another day. Getting off subject. But if those didn't convince you, those two quotes from their literature, that the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses is aware of the power of persuasion and manipulation, how about an example from them just to kind of lighten the mood before we get into the nasty stuff? From the Awake of 1980, January 8th, pages 13 through 14, has mass persuasion affected you? The faithful and discreet slave wanted us to know this. Quote, "Are you affected?" is the subheading. Often propaganda is indirect and can cause a change in thinking without one's being aware of it. End quote. They're here referencing the book Hidden Persuaders by Vance Packard, who opens his book by saying, quote, "This book is about the way, many of us are being influenced and manipulated far more than we realize in the patterns of our everyday lives," end quote. Then the governing body and faithful slave puts to print in the same article an example so we really understand their message, saying, quote, "Mr. Packard shows how psychological consultants are employed to investigate even our baser motives. Among the studies that he cites is one done for a fountain pen company on the sensuality and sexual connotations of pens," end quote. Thank you, faithful and discreet slave. Even our pens are dangerous, and they're all about sex. That's right, the ballpoint pen on your desk, it can make you horny. And I'll let you guess what the sexual connotation of a pen is. What's a pen top symbolize, you might ask? Should I chew on my pins? Should I still put my pen in my mouth? Oh boy, I'm going to stop there. I'll stop there. All courtesy of the all-wise, faithful, and discreet slave on subjects of manipulation and how we're being manipulated, don't know it, and it even includes our ballpoint pens. But more importantly, these references tell us that the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses is fully aware of the power of planted thoughts. With their own admission that we are heavily influenced, dare I say manipulated, by those that we listen to, how has the governing body manipulated millions of people into serving them? Jehovah, right? It's really Jehovah they're serving. Where do I begin? How much time do you have? The world of Jehovah's Witnesses is a masterclass in manipulation. I'm often asked by people who listen to the show in notes and in conversation if I personally think the governing body knows what they're doing. Do they know? Is this planned? Is this by design? And my answer is an unequivocal yes. Yes, they do know. It turns out the master manipulators have a lot to say about the art of manipulation. So it would be borderline impossible for them to not know. And first, let me say that manipulation is often done with subtlety. We mentioned cell phones. We mentioned social media, filters. Oh my God, my skin looks great on my Instagram. It's often veiled in things we all take for granted. Take a look, as an example, one that pops into my head, at the snooze button on your alarm. And by the way, that's probably on your cell phone, right? The snooze button. Who in the hell invented that thing? I know I'm going to get in trouble. There's people who love the snooze button. I don't understand it. Welcome to a peek inside my head. Why? I have to get up, but you're going to get me believing 10 more minutes of drowsiness is a good thing? Who invented that thing? It's subtle. But one of the easiest ways to manipulate someone is to control their time management. The little alarm is an example. But time management comes into play when you're trying to control someone. And when you manipulate them, in other words, dominate every minute of their every day. If you're able to do that, you have control. The reason many Jehovah's Witnesses are so easy to manipulate and control can be found in the subtle, not so subtle schedule a Jehovah's Witness is required to keep. We took it for granted when we were there, but what a tool it is for them. The repetitive nature of all things Jehovah's Witness is stifling. We even had a point in the old theocratic school, repetition for emphasis. Remember that? They are masters at repetition for emphasis. And that can be seen in its most basic mundane form, that's not even a fair word to use, in their schedule. I'll use my former schedule as an example, but I realize that there have been changes now with some of these meeting times and meetings that have gone away in 2024. But my schedule, which I've shared in past episodes, looks something like this. Monday, book study preparation from one of their publications. Tuesday, attend the book study and conduct it, which is now gone since 2009. Wednesday, service meeting preparation from, again, their publications, possibly even a theocratic school talk like the Bible reading or instruction talk. Thursday, go to the school, give the talks, go to the service meeting, give the part. Friday, I'd have to start studying the Watchtower study. I was the conductor for 8 years. Saturday, I'd have to preach. I'd have to place their literature. I'd have to look it over beforehand to prepare something to say at the doors. Sunday, public talk and Watchtower study. I've admitted here that I oftentimes would give the public talk and conduct the Watchtower study. I even did that in different congregations. If you're keeping track at home, that is 7 days a week for a Jehovah's Witness. 7 days a week. Those very meetings are in place to tell a witness to then practice daily Bible reading in their spare time, of course, only in the New World Translation, to wake up every morning and also read examining the scriptures daily for a daily dose of propaganda or encouragement. They had their monthly Watchtower and Awakes to read in their spare time. They had new books from the conventions, and now they've even got videos and Pixar-like cartoons for the kids. All of it 7 days a week featuring their brand of Christianity, including that Bible that they have translated on their own, despite zero scholarly qualifications to do so. Again, many of those leaving the organization wonder if the governing body knows what they're doing, if this is by design, if this form of manipulation is put in place by them to control Jehovah's Witnesses. Are they trying to manipulate us? Is often the question I get the most. Friends, anyone listening, they have always known. It was set in motion by Judge Joe Rutherford himself, allegedly listening in on this apostate podcast and shining up his bow and arrows to hit me with them any minute now. He's in heaven after all. But check out what Judge Joe had to say when he designed the perfect program of manipulation of Jehovah's Witnesses. The Watchtower of 1944, April 1st, page 112. And I really want to put a spotlight on this for a Jehovah's Witness that may be listening. Judge Joseph Rutherford, he of heavenly fame, currently kicked back with his feet up next to Jesus in heaven, did this, quote, "The society for years has tried to keep all those persons making a covenant with God busy in kingdom work. It was to this end that we have arranged Watchtower studies, service meetings, book studies, and now the course in theocratic ministry. Also, we have encouraged the brethren to make back calls, arranging for book studies. If they follow this course of action, they will keep out of mischief. They will be busy looking after the king's business and will have no time for the pleasures of the world." End quote. Do they know what they're doing? Ah, yes, the obvious. Put them on a soul-crushing schedule. a schedule that exists in 2024. That quote was from 1944. But if you didn't catch the subtle art of manipulation practiced by Jesus' guys, note that it's all referred to as the king's business. That's right. If you were thinking of begging off any of the schedule designed for Jehovah's Witnesses, you, my dear friend, are letting Jesus himself down. You're not taking care of Jesus' business. I see what you did there, Judge Joe. I see what you did there. Do they have beer in heaven, by the way? Asking for a friend. From the beginning, keeping Jehovah's Witnesses overwhelmed with their propaganda and manipulation has always been part of the plan. It was set in motion early in the organization. And so people continue to ask me, hey, are they manipulating us? Do they know what they're doing? The answer is a resounding yes. This is not some innocent stupidity that these guys have stumbled in upon, and they just want to keep us safe. They're shepherding us. This is by design. Now, you could end this conversation right here, and I think most people would be convinced as to how the governing body manipulates people. Certainly ex-witnesses are. However, couple that schedule and the diet of spiritual food with the vehement command to never, and I mean never, look outside the organization or its literature. And folks, you have a steady stream of information that allows them to control our minds and manipulate us in a direction they want us, you and I, to go. And it's all done with subtlety to a Jehovah's Witness until, you have this polarizing moment where you're able to break a few brain cells free and start asking questions. Once we left, how many of us didn't kick ourselves? And this is a very honest question for anyone listening that's left. How many of us don't look back now and kick ourselves, wondering how in the world we were fooled by all of this? I still get people who are on their journey out in the last few years going, I can't believe I was suckered by this stuff. People, please be kind to yourself. Cut yourself a little slack. We're all guilty of this by human nature. I mentioned the cell phones and social media. We're still suckers for that stuff, even though we know it's not really that great for us at the end. These guys were manipulating us, and oftentimes we knew no other way. Especially for those of us that were kids raised in this stuff, the fact remains we had been manipulated. It shouldn't shock anybody that they're now using the world's tools, including the very things I mentioned at the outset: cell phone apps, websites, music videos, literature, to manipulate millions of people. Some of us remember a time when they condemned the internet. Now they've replaced the Bible and door-to-door preaching by pushing everyone to the internet, their website. For those of us old enough to remember, it's surreal at times. It truly is. But in the end, it doesn't really matter. In hindsight, they've always used every form of communication available to manipulate anyone that would listen. For those of us that have seen the old stuff, from phonographs to them parading around in the early part of the last century with sandwich boards on themselves, proclaiming religion is a snare and a racket, to films. Chuck Taze Russell was popping out films on creation, to music, to printed literature, to cassette tapes, CDs, you name it. The only thing that has changed in their master plan to manipulate people are the tools. It's the same plan. This is the same organization that has gone to the ends of the earth to point at other religions and institutions as propagandists. They've gone out of their way to show the world that they're not a cult. We'll get into that in a future episode. In an effort to convince you that they're the answer to anything and everything, they have written an avalanche of articles still available on the website and in printed form to convince and manipulate the masses that everyone else is after our minds except for them. Not them. They're not. It's everybody else, including invisible bad guys like Satan. And folks, that messaging works. It works well. It worked on many of us, as we know. It's a very difficult dynamic to break free from. From the Watchtower Study Edition of July 2017, we get this from the faithful slave, quote, "What is propaganda? In this context, it is the use of biased or misleading information to manipulate the way people think and act. Some equate propaganda with lies, distortion, deceit, manipulation, mind control, and psychological warfare, and associate it with unethical, harmful, and unfair tactics," from the book Propaganda and Persuasion, end quote. They know what manipulation does to people. The article continues with either the funniest example of zero self-awareness or more likely, as most of us know, the manipulative lies of the governing body. It says this, quote, "How dangerous is propaganda? It is insidious, like an invisible, odorless, poisonous gas, and it seeps into our consciousness because we may not see propaganda for what it is." Behavior specialist Vance Packard, same guy, observed, "Many of us are being influenced and manipulated far more than we realize. Under its influence," says one scholar, "men and women have been quite easily led into the most preposterously dangerous behavior, such as genocide, war, racist hysteria, religious intolerance, and many other forms of irrational behavior," end quote. How they write this stuff with a straight face is truly staggering. Manipulating people to accept genocide, coerce people into religious intolerance and many other forms of irrational behavior? You mean, I don't know, like talking their loved one into dying instead of accepting blood? Or crafting a message whose end is a universal genocide for not believing in the 9 guys in upstate New York? You mean like convincing people to shun the people they love most on the planet and then calling it loving? You don't say, governing body. Their quote from their magazine that either shows a gross lack of self-awareness as it described them, or just the deceit that they like to disseminate to the rest of us. You just can't make this stuff up. It's right there in print. But imagine what it looks like when this is read at a meeting and you look around and you see your other brothers and sisters, other good people, nodding their heads in agreement. That is, if they're not asleep. The depth of manipulation in this organization is sickening. And with millions exposed to this week after week, they remain trapped, believing and obeying things that their mind is desperately trying to scream at them is a lie. Cognitive dissonance, we talk about it. With that said, and barely a day to catch your breath, back to the meetings they then go, where the lie is reinforced in their mind and their obedience continues, even if passively, because it's all they've been force-fed and manipulated to believe. This formula of manipulation in Jehovah's Witnesses has been working for over a century. I see it as the foundation of their cult. I truly do, as it feeds on something we're all guilty of. And I hate saying this, we like to be lazy. We like to be lazy, all of us. Or we get tired, or we get stressed out. It's nice to just roll up to the Kingdom Hall and have someone tell you how to think and how to feel. Most of us have to fight against that in most cases. It's almost a respite from the stress of daily life. Just follow this formula, and guess what? You get to live forever. Now with the perfect beard, and apparently for the ladies, no more menstruation, and the perfect fruit Eve thought she was biting into back in the beginning. It's a simple formula. Follow what we have to say, you get to be there. And we're all guilty of being manipulated. And for those that have never had the pleasure of attending a meeting at their local Kingdom Hall, you may be wondering, hey, what goes on in there? There's no windows. What kind of content is shared? I recently discovered the work of Nicholas Spooner. Shout out to Nicholas if you happen to be listening. Hopefully we will meet someday. He is an accredited counselor who works with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses in the United Kingdom. Fantastic work, my friend. Just discovered your stuff. You can find his work at xjwcounseling.co.uk. Recommend you take a peek, especially if you're someone who's looking for therapy and you're in that part of the world. I want to share his recent observations that he captured in his blog on his site while attending a meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's such a fantastic share on this subject of covert manipulation that happens at every single meeting. Meetings you and I attended regularly and where we were worked over. Our minds were captured, most of us from the time we were kids, which is deeply disturbing. But his blog there on his site goes on to relate that he was greeted kindly. He sat down where he was prepared to dig into the truth by means of modern technology. Things have changed, including an iPad. He goes on to share that he would, quote, when do the thought reform components show themselves and strengthen the grip on members? However, I was looking through eyes that were keen to spot things that others would not. He's a counselor after all. My ears were attuned to moments when members were being psychologically manipulated. Even though it seemed, on the face of it, very innocent, these elements of thought reform began to show themselves. End quote. I want to emphasize that he went to one meeting with a keen eye looking for when the thought reform would begin. He goes on in his blog to relate several psychological techniques I'm just now learning about that he observed again in one meeting, including watching children fight their way through the boredom in songs. I had to laugh at that one. But my favorite moment, and one I can confirm, at least personally, that is their most powerful form of manipulation, is one he observes when mentioning the circuit overseer's visit. Who remembers those delightful visits? Such a good time. The elders in panic mode, everybody freaking out, getting that fresh shave in back in the day, lengthening that skirt, getting out in field service. The circuit overseer is here. And I don't want to misquote his experience, so I'm going to read directly from his blog when he attended this meeting. See if you can relate as a former witness or one on their way out to what he says. His blog says there, quote, the speaker on the platform was talking about the visit of the circuit overseer a few days earlier. He reminded the congregation about how they helped with tips on how to stay spiritually strong and the importance of keeping up your ministry work. He pointed out how selfless they were in giving up their time and their role as circuit overseers. True heroes. He goes on to relate, quote, we should all feel grateful for the time they spent with us. Shouldn't we? He proclaimed from the platform, the brother speaking that is, and I look around at a room full of nodding heads. Right there in that moment, the entire congregation were told how they should feel. How they should feel. They were not simply reminded of what the CO did and let them make up their own mind about whether it was useful for them or not. They were told how they had to feel about it. And everyone complied. End quote from Nicholas Spooner's observations. Oh yeah. So excited for those circuit overseers visits, weren't we? Sincerely, in my case, it was a circuit overseer that helped free me from the cult of Jehovah's Witnesses. His conduct, his lack of character was so bad that it jolted me awake in the moment in my late 30s. I learned he has since passed on, by the way, but I am very grateful for him exposing himself for what it all truly was. It saved my life. But Nicholas Spooner continues in his observation from one meeting in his blog. He says, quote, "Again, in isolation, nothing too sinister, but in every meeting, in every hall, every week, tens of thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses are being told how to feel. They are told how they should feel about Jehovah and the things he has done. They are told to feel about worldly people. They are told how to feel about non-baptized witnesses. They are told how to feel about disfellowship witnesses. They are told how they must feel about everything." End quote from his blog. Please go check it out. Feelings. Nothing is more powerful in capturing a person than tapping into their feelings. I can confirm as someone that gave countless public talks, local needs, convention parts, baptism talks, you name it, that I personally, I'm just going to expose myself. I was always going for the feels. Of course I was. I learned it from the Bible. I learned it by reading about Jesus. I then grew up watching other men do it in the organization, leveraging the technique to teach their insincere lies to anyone that would listen, including me. Let me ask you, are you one of those people that gets emotional with music? I talk a lot about music because it's one of my favorite things. I am big time. It affects my emotions. Good, bad, indifferent, sad, happy, you name it. Music. There's a name for one kind of musical pleasure that induces millions of people to undergo emotion. And that word is frisson, a physical sensation that causes goosebumps and a sudden rush of emotional processing with music. And I got to tell you, it works on me. I am absolutely drowning in frisson when I listen to music every time because it causes feelings. It conjures things up in me. And many of us are ruled by our feelings if you're a particularly emotional person. Not always good, I might add, but true. And in an organization that preaches things like free will, they consistently work to manipulate your thinking and your feelings because it works. Pictures of paradise, your grandparents jumping out of their graves and running to you, videos of soldiers storming into your downstairs bunker with machine guns and surrounding your family, featured at district conventions. Cartoons of Caleb and Sophia bypassing their ice cream to give their money to Stephen Lett and his friends. Experiences in their literature no one can corroborate, including violence, death, and mayhem. All for obeying a doctrine not found in the Bible. All of it designed to manipulate our feelings. And I can never say it enough, children are being exposed to this. I was one of them and deeply harmed week after week, especially in the formative years when your mind is putting thoughts together and developing critical thinking. Like Dr. Nicholas Spooner, his observations, I might add, they are manipulating the way you think about things. And his conclusion as a counselor is so profound. He goes on to say in his blog there on his website, from birth, your ability to think for yourself is systematically removed until you simply accept everything you are told as the truth. This is a quote, by the way. Without critical thought, you are unlikely to examine the doctrine and make your own mind up about whether you feel it is humane or fair, let alone even true. This is why it is so hard for anyone to escape from the Jehovah's Witness organization, and why those that do wake up and leave can find life so hard and face real challenges to recover from the experience. End quote. I want to thank Nicholas Spooner. And I really do genuinely hope we can talk or meet at some point. I find your work fascinating. I'm very interested in it. I could benefit from it. For those of us raised as Jehovah's Witnesses and wondering why we seem to be a hot mess some days, Nicholas just gave us the answer. We are undoing decades of manipulation. Manipulation thrust upon us by well-meaning parents in many cases, but parents themselves under the spell of abusive manipulation. So it's so important for us to be kind to ourselves. We are truly undoing something that was put in place by adults, oftentimes when we are children, by an organization and its leadership that wanted to hold us captive. And you can see from the medical health profession, the mental health profession, it's not difficult to identify why we find ourselves a train wreck emotionally and mentally on so many things when we leave this organization. It goes without saying, but much of their game plan centers around diverting your attention from what they truly are. Going back to the January 8th, 1980 Awake, page 14, they mix in one of their famous illustrations that in the end only serves to condemn them. Oh, the irony. It says, quote, "In some respects, our minds are like a container of water. If one adds just a drop or two of ink, all the water quickly becomes colored. Do not allow mass persuasion by popular opinions to sway you into accepting viewpoints that the scriptures show to be wrong." End quote. And if you're looking for examples, do you mean things like this? You can have blood fractions, but not blood itself. You can take other people's blood fractions, but you can't give them your blood fractions. Or that, I don't know, Jehovah hates beards, but now he doesn't in 2024, so grow them if you have them, people. Or Jesus hates you bettering yourself with education. Your money should be our money. Go witness to worldly people, but don't have a cup of coffee with your neighbor over the backyard fence. I could keep going, but you get it. The gross dishonesty to warn Jehovah's Witnesses to not allow mass persuasion or any persuasion to sway them from what the Bible says, only to see that the governing body does it on a regular basis themselves. And they trap you in a world of cognitive dissonance, confusion, and very upsetting feelings. Do they really want to condemn mass persuasion, otherwise known as manipulation? Because they live by it. They've used mass persuasion to get millions of people to believe Jesus has moved throughout the last century plus, choosing guys like them to speak for him, including the guy formerly known as a king, Tony Morris, then firing him and building him a house in North Carolina. Ask a Jehovah's Witness about this situation and watch their eyes physically glaze over. That's just an example that comes into my mind. The examples are endless. Their minds have been manipulated. How do you manipulate millions of men, millions of thinking grown-ass men, into not allowing their hair follicles to grow on their chin for the better part of a century? Even worse, those same grown men believe they need your permission to let them grow their hair on their body. And then if you didn't catch it this week, there's a demonstration virally making its way around social media where these men, a younger man and an older man, get on stage to do a demonstration and humiliate themselves by acting like they've won the lottery because 9 strangers told you that you can have the hair that grows on your face. They make jokes and laugh. The audience giggles. It's all so funny, without anyone realizing you have been manipulated and controlled for the better part of a century on your hair. These guys have controlled people's hair. The endless examples of manipulation from the 9 guys in upstate New York are suffocating. And I want to show what I believe is a very powerful example. If you don't like the beard thing, fine. It's getting overstated at this point. But I want to show you a very powerful example of how the governing body manipulates people. It won't be shocking to anyone that is left because, again, keep in mind there are millions who haven't left. They continue on with that schedule I mentioned minutes ago, where their minds are regularly manipulated. Take a look at this and see if you can spot anything. The Watchtower Study Edition, July 2017, Winning the Battle of Your Mind. How ironic is this one? We get this from the Faithful Slave, quote, "Do not be deceived. Let God's word guide you." End quote. You got it? The Bible should be your touchstone. A Jehovah's Witness will tell you, see, there it is. We only follow the Bible, and the governing body encourages daily Bible reading. It's our textbook for life. At face value, it sounds good. It looks good, right? But hold tight. They then say this. The Watchtower of 2016, November, page 16 article, quote, "Some may feel they can interpret the Bible on their own. However, Jesus has appointed the faithful and discreet slave to be the only channel for dispensing spiritual food." End quote. They continue. The Watchtower of 1967, June 1st, page 338, says this, quote, "In Jehovah's organization, it is not necessary to spend a lot of time and energy in research, for there are brothers in the organization who are assigned to do that very thing." End quote. Manipulation. They stated very plainly in 2017, all you need is the Bible, but, you can't read it or even understand it without us. So read it, but don't really read it. We will do that for you. We have brothers assigned to do that for you. But read it, but don't really read it. The most widely distributed book, we are told, is a product of Holy Spirit, isn't meant for you after all. You need us. They point at it and tell you that they will explain to you and what it all means inside the book. People who are still under their manipulative spell will bristle at that. It's uncomfortable to hear, and if you're here bravely listening, huge respect. Stay. But they've been conditioned to bristle at that. And for whose mind is slowly breaking free from all the manipulation, they will double down and reinforce that you still need them. And much like the visit to the Kingdom Hall I shared with Nicholas Spooner, they go for the feels. They go for your feelings, your character. Most of what they do to capture someone's mind centers on the concept of loyalty. Loyalty that ultimately is tied to, guess what? Everlasting life. It's subtle, but obvious to someone who is broken free of their grasp. From the Watchtower Study Edition, July 2017, the same article, Winning the Battle of Your Mind, we get this, quote, "A soldier whose loyalty to his leader is weakened will not fight well. So propagandists attempt to break bonds of confidence and trust between a soldier and his commander. They may use such propaganda as, 'You cannot trust your leaders,' and 'Do not let them lead you into disaster.' To add weight to these attacks, they may cleverly exploit any mistakes those leaders might make. Satan does this. He never gives up trying to undermine your confidence in the leadership that Jehovah has provided. Your defense? Be determined to stick to Jehovah's organization and loyally support the leadership he provides, no matter what imperfections may surface." End quote. Can you spot the manipulation? When you're losing that grip on someone, you can easily control and coerce them by questioning their loyalty. Are you going to be loyal to your leaders? And I'll give you one guess who the leader is in their illustration. They've had such illustrious leaders that believed in pyramids, miracle weed, that got hammered drunk and lived in San Diego mansions with Rolls Royces. They've had leaders who tell us the world is ending several times, including in 1975. They've even recently had a leader with a shopping cart full of liquor at a liquor store on a Sunday. They have leaders that had a secret pedophile database. You're not going to get hung up or cleverly exploited by those pointing out these facts, are you? Manipulation. When you can't control someone, you stab at the loyalty that goes all the way up to heaven, according to them. Even when mistakes arise, even when people tell you facts, ignore them, be loyal. For those that are starting to question the organization and wonder if the governing body knows what they're doing, my question to you is, do you consider this type of thing manipulation? If you don't, then I'd like to ask you what you do consider this to be. I go back to the most recent and borderline hilarious example. What would you consider strangers telling you that you couldn't have hair on your face, then go on camera and giving millions of grown adults permission to have hair on their face? The painful answer lies in watching how many are suddenly growing hair on their face, making jokes about it and celebrating. It's all just good fun after all. Celebrating hair on their face because 9 guys told them that they approve. Wow. Let it sink in. Wow. Grown men dancing around and tossing their razors without ever realizing they had been manipulated for decades. Decades. But back to that concept of loyalty as defined by the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's a blind loyalty that dangles the carrot of everlasting life. And it works. It worked on me for many years. It manipulates people into those kingdom halls. It moves them next to those book carts and giving up their time, their dreams. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness listening, it's all manipulation. In what is now my all-time favorite quote ever put to the pages of the Watchtower, I encourage you to consider, really consider what they said. In the Watchtower of 2013, November 15th, page 20, where they said this, quote, "All of us must be ready to obey any instructions we may receive, whether these appear sound from a strategic or human standpoint or not." End quote. For a witness listening, Watchtower 2013, November 15th, page 20. Obey. That ship you're boarding, it has gaping holes in it. Get on board anyway. That plane you're boarding, the engines have failed every time they've taken off. See their end of the world predictions, but take your seat on the plane anyway. That food you're about to eat, well, we found traces of arsenic, but take a bite anyway. It doesn't matter if it doesn't appear sound from your viewpoint, dear Jehovah's Witness. Do it anyway. You don't want to be disloyal, do you? You don't want to miss out on everlasting life, do you? In what world would anyone of right, healthy mind follow such instructions when it goes against all common sense? The answer is easy. It's very easy. Only people that are being manipulated. After telling people to blindly follow them, whether it makes sense or not, I ask you to take a walk with me and check out what flies out of the other side of their mouth. In the Awake of 1982, February 8th, pages 4 through 6, under the subheading A Closer Look, The same guys who said obey whether it makes sense or not gave us this, calling it spiritual food. Quote, at first, it might seem innocent enough that one puts one's own personal experience ahead of the Bible itself. But do you realize what that could lead to? Recall that in Guyana, the leader of the Jonestown group tragedy cast aside the Bible and impressed his followers with the need to listen to him and his revelations from God. He had convinced them that they should trust their experience with him over God's written word. Do you see the dangers that come from such a position? How vulnerable it makes a person? End quote. Pause. Do you remember who Jim Jones of Guyana was and what his organization was called? So you're saying to blindly obey you, whether it makes sense or not, as we read from the Watchtower 2013, because you nine alone have revelations from God as his chosen faithful slave? You're telling us to trust your experience over the Bible because we need you to tell us what it means after all. Exactly like cult leader Jim Jones did, who led a mass genocide at Jonestown, Guyana. Let it sink in. Please. Their own words, their own literature. Despite what the governing body continually tells Jehovah's Witnesses, those of us that have left want nothing from you. I don't do this podcast because I'm making money or I'm trying to make friends or get followers or start a Bible study group or my own religion. No, we didn't start a religion and we aren't after your money. Aside from many losing their families and friends due to the shunning policy, most of us out here are on to the next stage of our lives. And we really care about you if you're still a witness. The Watchtower Study Edition, July 2017, you remember the article, goes on to say this, quote, have you ever watched a film in which from your vantage point in the audience, you can clearly see that someone is being deceived and manipulated? Did you find yourself thinking, do not believe it? They're lying to you. Imagine then the angel shouting the same message to you, do not be fooled by Satan's lies. End quote. I can sure relate to that. That feeling you get when you're watching a movie and you can see someone's going into a room and there's a bad guy behind the door and you're screaming at the screen. Their illustration in their literature, with so much lack of self-awareness and so much manipulation, is oh so fitting for how those of us that have broke free feel about those of you who haven't. We have all been victims of Jehovah's Witnesses. For those of us that have broken free of the manipulation, we are those people watching your movie, screaming, don't be deceived, don't be manipulated. They're lying to you, just like the quote says. There is much more serious forms of manipulation than social media. This is a battle for your mind, your very life. I'm asking anyone who's listening to just consider some of this information. Take the filters off. Put down the cell phone they gave you. These guys are lying to you. You've been manipulated. I want to thank you for listening this week. Wherever you may be, big hugs. Be well.